You're right on time for Africa Focus. Good afternoon from where you're watching us from. My name is Joel Church and our sign language interpreter is Tracy Dorcas. Talk to us via social media platforms at Switch TV Kenya, Joel Chacha M on Twitter, as well on Facebook, Switch TV Kenya and Joel Chacha. Send in an SMS via 111 444 111. But first, here are stories making headlines. French President Emmanuel Macron vows to offer support for Chad's stability. African leaders hold a regional meeting on the crisis in the Central African Republic, a country in civil war for nearly 8 years. We take you inside an animal graveyard where hundreds of famous animals are buried. We begin when Nigerian security officials announced the death of 3 Greenfield University students who have been shot dead by abductors who attacked the private Greenfield University, kidnapping a number of students whose numbers are yet to be determined. Take a look.
Gunmen attacked a private university in Nigeria's northern Kaduna estate, killing one of the staff members and kidnapping some students. It was not immediately clear, however, how many students had been abducted by the Greenfield University during the attack.
Tuesday, 20th April 2021, at around 8:30 p.m., Kaduna State Ministry of Internal Security and Home Affairs received a distress call from Greenfield University.
According to the 2 officials at the university, at least 20 students were still missing, though it was unclear how many had been taken by the gunmen or had fled from the attack.
The school management and security agencies on the ground informed Kaduna State government that a staff of the university was killed here, and some students were also kidnapped.
Schools targeted in the northern Nigeria are usually in the remote areas where students stay only in the dormitories with watchmen as security.
We are going around the institution. Security agencies are also working in the general area. For now, this is the information that we can give.
The recent mass kidnapping have prompted 6 northern states to shut public schools to prevent further attacks. Gunmen last night seized 39 students from a college in Afaka in Kaduna State after a gunfight with the soldiers, having some of the students being freed while others are still being held captive. According to the UN agency UNICEF, since 2020 December, some 720 students have been abducted, disrupting the studies of more than 5 million children. Robert Uma, Switch TV News.
Shifting gears now to matters politics. Somalia's military left the front lines of their battle against Al-Shabaab in the middle of Shabelle region and entered into Mogadishu, taking over northern parts of the city, all in a bid of showing their rejection of government's move of extending its mandate by 2 years. Brian Mwenda now reports.
Somalia has accused some of its foreign backers of undermining its sovereignty after the embattled government was threatened with sanctions over a decision to extend its mandate by 2 years. President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed signed into a law special resolution extending his time in office despite his term expiring on February, and repeat warnings that such a move will not be supported by Western powers.
Most of the people are in defiance of the government extending term limits. The president, whose term has finished, could lead the country into war. A peaceful demonstration is underway here now. The military are capturing new positions. The country could be taken back into civil war.
They say the mandate extension threatens peace and stability in Somalia and distracts from its fight against the Al-Shabaab Islamist group. The United States, a key partner in the war on terror, and the European Union has warned on sanctions and other penalties should talks towards elections between the feuding parties not be urgently resumed.
Today, we have gathered here to show our feelings towards the government extending its term and towards a dictator who wants to use force to stay in power. We thank the military forces who helped us demonstrate peacefully.
The upper house was not permitted to consider the mandate extension, and the Speaker of the Senate declared the legislation null and void. The US said it is deeply disappointed in the move and wants such actions will be deeply divisive and erode the progress towards peace made in between the countries into them with the international community. Somalia received $2 billion in overseas development assistance in both 2017 and 2018, according to Somali government data. The EU and the US were among the top contributors of this aid, which represent roughly a quarter of the gross domestic product of the impoverished country. Brian Mwanda, Switch TV.
Now, in a quick rejoinder, Somalia's President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed Alias Farmajo has dropped actually his attempt to extend the term by 2 years, bowing to domestic and international pressure. Away from that, Vice President of the Transitional Military Council, Major General Tariani, says the Transitional Military Council will hand over power to a civilian government after free and democratic elections within 18 months after Chad's President Idriss Deby Itno died in combat just a day after securing re-elections.
Following the death of Chad President Idriss Deby Itno, who succumbed into injuries acquired during a combat, the Vice President of the Transitional Military Council, Major General Jimodu, said the Transitional Military Council will hand over power to a civilian government after free and democratic elections, which will take place within 18 months. Before then, however, the late president's son, 37-year-old and four-star General Mahatma Idriss Deby Itno, will run presidential activities within the country.
Nous voudrions rassurer l'opinion que les membres du Conseil.
We wanted to reassure the public that the members of the Transitional Military Council will hand over power to a civilian government after free and democratic elections within 18 months.
Dans un délai de 18 mois.
According to Richard Moncrief of the International Crisis Group, a damaging succession crisis is to be feared while government forces and rebels have been fighting each other in the north and central country. Caroline Tsuma, Switch TV.
Still a focus in Chad, the French President Emmanuel Macron has vowed to offer support for Chad's stability during the funeral of veteran ruler Idriss Deby Itno, and stated that France will be at Chad's side. He further urged his military successors to steer a smooth return to civilian rule.
French President Emmanuel Macron vowed to offer support for Chad's stability during the funeral of veteran ruler Idriss Deby, and further urged his military successors to steer a smooth return to civilian rule while giving tribute to the late Deby and calling him a brave soldier.
Il nous appartient de faire vivre ce serment. C'est un serment de liberté.
It is up to us to keep this oath alive. It is an oath of freedom and independence. France will never let anyone, either today or tomorrow, challenge Chad's stability and integrity.
Ni demain, la stabilité et l'intégrité du Tchad. La France sera également là pour faire vivre, sans attendre, la promesse d'un Tchad.
France is also there to sustain the promise of a peaceful Chad, and it will make room for all of its children and all its constituents. The transition will have this role to play: stability, inclusion, dialogue, democratic transition, and we will be at your side.
La transition démocratique. et nous sommes et serons à vos côtés. Cher Idriss, vous avez écrit une page indélébile d'amitié.
Dear Idriss, you have written an everlasting chapter of friendship between Chad and France, and I will carry with them the memory of a friend. People of Chad honor today the legacy of courage, peace and independence left by President and Marshal Deby. Unite in this memory to build the future that your youth deserve.
Unissez-vous dans ce souvenir afin de bâtir l'avenir que votre mérite.
Chad under Deby has become a cornerstone for France's anti-jihadist strategy in Sahel, hosting a headquarters of its 5,100-man Burkina force. France was also a staunch ally of Deby, twice coming to his rescue to thwart attempted coup during his 30-year tenure. Brian Mwenda, Switch TV.
Meanwhile, African leaders held a regional meeting on the crisis in the Central African Republic, a country in civil war for nearly 8 years. A mini silence was held at the summit in memory of Chad's late President Idriss Deby Itno, who succumbed to wounds obtained in fighting against rebels.
The head of state and government expressed their deep sorrow at the death of His Excellency Marshal Idriss Deby Itno, President of the Republic of Chad, which occurred today in his country, and offered their condolences to the government and the people of Chad, as well as the family in mourning. The head of state and government took note of the guiding principle of the roadmap towards a Republican dialogue and encouraged the respect of these principles in order to allow the success of the Republican dialogue. The head of state and government has stressed the importance of putting to an end impunity in the Central African Republic by bringing the perpetrators of violation of international humanitarian law and human rights violation to justice, and like the Security Council, encourage the national authorities to set up a thorough justice, reparation and reconciliation commission.
Justice, réparation et réconciliation.
Time to take a breather. Stay with us here on Africa Focus. Still to come. As Senegalese wrestling resumes, causing relief to wrestlers and spectators in a country where the sport enjoys widespread popularity. Welcome back to Africa Focus. My name is Joel Church and our sign language interpreter is Tracy Dorcas. Moving on, the coronavirus pandemic led to the shutting down of Senegalese wrestling for a year. Fighting has, however, resumed, causing relief to wrestlers and spectators in this country where the sport enjoys widespread popularity.
Feet firm in the sand, they tackle each other again.
10 Bali Senegalese wrestlers raise a chant singing "Mother Pray for Us" while jogging up and down a sandy field by the Atlantic Ocean in honor of resumed training after a year of coronavirus-related restrictions that had stopped them from practicing the sport.
So this has caused a lot of damage to all the actors in the wrestling sector, because wrestling is not only the wrestlers, it's the stables and the whole economic environment around wrestling.
Harvest rituals of the local.
Wrestling in the West African nation is a centuries-old tradition rooted in harvesting festivals and draws a fanatical following. Hulking fighters dressed in loincloths face off in packed stadiums, performing mystic rituals in the sand before going toe-to-toe.
The period of the pandemic was very difficult for us. If we only had to take care of our families, there would be no problem. But there are other people who believe in us and with whom we have to share what we have. I'm very close to my supporters and I have an obligation to support them. We have really felt the damage caused by the pandemic.
A former national champion, once crowned king of the arenas, Sin is hoping to make a comeback in his match against a fighter known as Lac 2. There are 5 separate bouts on Sunday's fight card, but this one is the main draw. Panels advertising the event line on the streets.
All Senegalese love wrestling because it is where we find ourselves. Not only do we practice the sport, it is a whole culture that is brought back in the wrestling sessions.
With the return of the season, many wrestlers in this poor nation of 16 million people are hoping for a boost to their incomes. Coronavirus restrictions put some 8,000 professionals fighting out of a job, according to Senegal's National Wrestling Association. Faith Wambua, Switch TV.
Meanwhile, South African wheelchair tennis player Kogosan Monjen is training hard for her 4th Paralympic Games later this year. Ranked 5th in the world by the ITF, KG, as she's known by her fans, has her eyes are set on a spot on the podium in Tokyo. But for this professional athlete, winning isn't everything, and she hopes to inspire and encourage others as she makes her way to the top.
Kodatsko KG Montjane, a professional wheelchair tennis player, is going to represent South Africa in the highest competitive level for the 4th time, having been ranked 5th in the world by the International Tennis Foundation, and has high hopes for this year's Paralympic Games in Tokyo. The 34-year-old was born with a congenital birth defect, having a left leg being amputated at the age of 12 so that she could use the prosthetic leg to walk again. Only started playing tennis in a final year in high school and fell in love with it at the university, as it was the sole sport available to disabled students.
This time around going into Paralympics, you know, for me, my goal is just to finish in the podium. Doesn't really matter which medal color it is, but I think if I can really push myself to get to the podium, that will be enough.
Having played tennis from the age of 19, KG, as she's affectionately known, feels she needs to train harder than most of her opponents by her balancing her training with fitness, skills improvement, and making sure she's psychologically prepared.
I feel like there's a need for me to actually catch up, and by doing that, I had to put in a lot of hours, and I really need to grind hard because yeah, I guess to become the best player in the world, you really need to work hard because I would like to believe champions were not made over magic.
She made history in 2018 by becoming the first ever black South African woman to compete in Wimbledon tournament. This is making a mark in the tennis world and hopes to share her success with other South Africans.
Like my generation could go out there and play, and whenever opportunities like that to represent my country, you know, carry it with a lot of pride, because it's not only for me, but it also gives hope to those who are at home, who are from similar background as me, to actually be hopeful that they can make it in any aspect of their life.
This year's games will be very different than previous years. No spectators are allowed due to COVID-19 restrictions, but despite this, KG is determined to be at the top of our game. Apollo James, Switch TV.
Now, here in the country, the death of animals has never been received or treated like the death of a human being. However, we take you to an animal cemetery where pet owners take their animals and accord them a decent send-off. Famous dogs like Mukombozi that rescued a baby dumped in a forest have been laid there. Our reporter Daniel Karuki takes us to an organization that collects, treats and cares for stray animals.
In an ordinary city, the sight of stray dogs and cats is not foreign. We visit Kenya Society for the Protection and Care of Animals, KSPCA, an animal welfare charity in Kenya that collects and shelters domestic animals and even accords them decent funeral services upon their deaths.
Okay, so welcome to the KSPCA. I'm Ian Keringa, and the KSPCA basically stands for the Kenya Society for the Protection and Care of Animals. Society designed and with the mandate to look after the welfare of most domestic animals, but we also do some few of other animals in partnership with other agencies. The KSPCA was started in 1910, so it's 110 years old, and it was started by a few people who, while they were moving around, they saw an oxen that was carrying a lot of goods, and the oxen seemed to be in really much distress. So they decided to come together and start an organization that at least cares for the animals. At that time, it was known as the East African Society for the Prevention of Cruelty, which later changed to the Kenya Society for the Prevention of Cruelty against Animals. Within some cultures, we'll say cats are evil spirits. You see some of the sayings in the local dialects, like Swahili, you find for donkeys, they'll say, "Asanti ya punda ni mateke." Yeah. So you find there's a cultural belief that has led to these animals being neglected.
Upon the collection of an animal, it goes through the clinic, then put in a recovery unit before it's let to interact with other animals.
Recovery unit where after the animals have been treated by the vet, they come to recover before rejoining the rest of the animals within the shelter. We'll pick the dog, treat them. If we feel that the dog is still safe to go back to the same location, we take the dog back. If we feel the dog is worth to be rehabilitated and find another home, we'll keep the dog, rehabilitate the dog, neuter the dog, vaccinate the dog, and then try and find a new home for the dog.
How many dogs do you have here, and how much does it cost to feed all these dogs?
On an average, we have around 140 to 160 dogs. That is usually the range which we have, 140 to 160 dogs. And the cost of feeding the dogs is one of our major challenges, because we spend around 200,000 to feed the dogs in a month. Anyone can adopt a dog, but as I said, just as for cats, once you come into the shelter and you're looking to adopt an animal, there's a questionnaire that you have to fill, which helps us basically understand whether you're able to take care of the dog or cat. So once you fill the questionnaire and you feel that you're able, then we go around and we look at the dogs that are available, and we also help you match a dog depending on where you're taking the dog. For example, if you're taking a big dog, there's no way you're going to take that dog to an apartment. That dog needs a big compound where it's going to be able to move around. So we always try and educate the person also adopting, and try to explain to them why they should adopt a certain dog and maybe not adopt another one.
So like how much is a big dog?
Any dog for adoption, or the case we say, is 8,000 shillings. Regardless of the breed, regardless of the size, it's 8,000. And basically the 8,000 is not actually a charge. It's actually a basic donation so that we can be able to take care of them, feed them, vaccinate the dog you're adopting, and also neuter the dog you're adopting.
We then walked to the donkey shelter, one of the most mistreated animals.
So run a donkey welfare program. Basically we educate the communities on proper care of donkeys. That is on harness making, cart designs, and how to work with the donkeys.
The graveyard. The chills will definitely go down your spine. Death will be the first thought that will struck your mind. But in this case, it's not human death.
It's a graveyard where people used to bury. We stopped it in 2019. We used to bury pets. Anyone from outside will come and pay a small fee and bury the dog. The reason for that was because for us we believe that when you have an animal is part of the family, and every care that you give that animal should be similar to what you will give to a human being who is a member of the family. So the same way that we give our loved one in the homes a send-off, a proper send-off, so we also advocate for people to love their pets and be able to give them a proper send-off like they will send human beings. It's hundreds, and as you can see from the grave, from the stones, several of the dogs have been buried. And as I said, it was started because we got requests from people who wanted to bury their pets.
In this very graveyard where famous dogs, including military dogs, are laid to rest, including Mkombozi, the dog that came into the limelight in May 2005 after she rescued a newborn baby girl who was abandoned in the thickets of Ngong Forest. The dog had then been foraging for food for her young ones. It is here at this animal kingdom that our journey comes to an end, here at this graveyard where the owners chose to give any pet a decent send-off to owners who chose to treat their animals as one of theirs, including the famous Mukombozi, the dog that saved a kid from a forest. Daniel Karuki for Switch TV.
Well, that's all here on Africa Focus. But keep the conversation going on our social media platforms. Switch TV Kenya, Joel Chacha M on Twitter, as well on Facebook, Switch TV Kenya, Joel Chacha. Keep sending in your feedback via 111 444 111. My director has been Hillary, producer Faith Ombua. And my name is Joel Chacha, and our sign language interpreter is Tracy Dorcas. Until next time, do have a safe, great weekend.